I was 17. He was supposed to protect me. Instead, he handed me a pen and told me to sign. I didn't know I was signing away my future, my inheritance, my home, everything my mother left behind. He smiled like it was nothing. 10 years later, I'm a licensed attorney, and I just filed a lawsuit that will destroy the man who thought he outsmarted me. You want revenge? Let me show you how it's done. Slow, calculated, and legal. Because when you rob a girl at 17, you better pray she doesn't grow up to be a lawyer. Have you ever been betrayed by someone who should have protected you? Tell me in the comments. Smash that like button, hit subscribe. Because this is not just a story. This is war. My name is Leah. I'm 27, and I've spent the last decade chasing justice for myself. When my mother died unexpectedly, I was still a teenager grieving, confused, and vulnerable. My stepfather, Carl, was the only adult left in my life. He acted like he cared. He cooked dinners, drove me to school, hugged me like a father would. But behind that fake smile was a monster. One day he brought out some papers. Said they were just routine legal stuff, just formalities, he told me. At 17, with no one else to turn to, I signed. I trusted him. It took me years to understand what I'd really signed. By the time I hit law school, I'd seen enough legal documents to know something was very wrong. My mother's inheritance, her house, her savings, even her art collection had all legally transferred to Carl just weeks after her death. He'd forged a trap with ink and manipulation. Now, I've got a plan. He thought I was just a grieving little girl. He has no idea what's coming. I was a quiet girl. Always kept my head down. Always did what I was told. My mother used to say I had an old soul too sensitive for a world this cruel. She was my anchor, my soft place to land. When she got sick, everything changed. And when she died, it felt like my whole universe collapsed. I was just 17. Carl, my stepfather, had married my mom when I was 10. At first, I thought he was decent. He didn't try too hard to be my dad, but he was present, polite, helpful even. But after Mom passed, that mask began to slip. Fast. I remember the day after her funeral. I was still in my black dress, sitting on the living room couch, clutching her scarf like a lifeline. Carl came in with coffee and a stack of papers. Leah, sweetheart, we need to get the estate in order. Your mom wanted everything simple. I was numb, exhausted. He placed the pen in my hand, tapped the pages, and said, "Just sign here. It's all for your benefit." He lied. Those papers were full of legalese, waivers, transfers, disclaimers. Later, I learned I had unknowingly signed away my right to contest my mother's will and authorized Carl to take full ownership of all her assets under the pretense of streamlining probate. But back then, I just wanted the grief to stop. I trusted him, and I signed. Carl changed after that. Suddenly, I wasn't his sweet girl anymore. He started acting like I was a guest in my own home. He sold my mother's furniture, got rid of her books, turned her bedroom into a home office, his office. I asked him once why he was doing it. "It's my house now, Leah. Your mom made sure of that." I didn't understand what he meant. Not until years later. I stayed just long enough to finish high school, then got out. Full scholarship to a small liberal arts college 2 states away. I left everything behind. Photos, keepsakes, even my mom's jewelry. He said it had gone missing. But deep down, I never forgot. Every time I walked into a classroom, I felt like I was fighting for her. For me. Like I had to prove that I mattered, that I wasn't disposable, that he didn't win. But the trauma, it stayed. I had nightmares about that day on the couch, about signing, about her voice disappearing forever, and his taking over. That ink on paper became a curse I carried everywhere. Law school wasn't even the original plan. I wanted to be a writer. But by the time I graduated college, I had one obsession: learn the law, understand the system, find the cracks, and maybe, just maybe, undo what he did. The more I studied, the angrier I got. There were laws to protect minors. Laws about undue influence, about fiduciary duty, about guardianship. Carl had violated all of them, and he knew it. He'd gambled on me being too young and too powerless to ever fight back. And for a while, he was right. I worked nights in cafes, took internships no one wanted, ate ramen for weeks. But I never stopped. Every legal brief I read, every deposition I transcribed, I saw his face, his smirk, that arrogant, condescending, smug bastard who thought he could outsmart a 17-year-old girl. He didn't know that girl would become a storm. By the time I was sworn in as an attorney, I had already drafted my strategy. The first step was getting the original documents. That took months of calls and digging. I posed as a legal assistant and requested copies from the probate court. The signatures were there, mine shaky and uneven, his bold and confident. Then came the bank records, the property transfers, the timeline. Piece by piece, I built the case. Carl had made a mistake. He'd filed one document too early before I turned 17 and a half. Under state law, that was a red flag. Enough to question capacity. Another mistake. He never had a guardian ad litem review the transfers, required by law for minors involved in estate proceedings. That omission alone could void the entire agreement. But the worst part, I found a handwritten note in the case file. My mother had written a letter days before her death, requesting that I be the sole beneficiary. Carl never submitted it to court. He hid it. That was the final nail. I wasn't just some grieving kid anymore. I was a fully licensed attorney, with evidence, legal standing, and righteous fury. And for the first time in 10 years, I felt like I could breathe. This wasn't just about money. It wasn't about houses or bank accounts. It was about my mother's voice being silenced, about Carl turning love into leverage. He thought I would disappear, but I came back stronger, and I was ready to burn everything he stole to the ground. The day I filed the lawsuit was the most liberating moment of my life. I walked into the courthouse, wearing a tailored suit, my case file clutched tightly in my hand. My heels echoed down the marble floor, and every step felt like justice, calling from the grave. I wasn't just Leah, the orphaned girl, anymore. I was Leah Blake, attorney at law, and I was suing the man who stole my life. The lawsuit included everything: unlawful transfer of assets, fraud against a minor, concealment of key documents, and emotional damages. But that wasn't even the sharpest blade in my arsenal. No, that came with Exhibit F, my mother's letter. I attached it at the end of the filing like a ghost, returning to speak her truth. Carl was served within 48 hours. And just like that, his world began to crack. He called me. Not through a lawyer, not through email. No, he actually picked up the phone and dialed me like nothing had ever happened. Leah. he said, his voice syrupy and smug. "What are you trying to do? Embarrass yourself." I didn't flinch. "No, Carl. I'm trying to end you. Legally." There was silence. Then a bitter laugh. "You think the courts care about a little paperwork from 10 years ago? Grow up." I did. "That's the problem for you." I hung up. Weeks passed, and discovery began. His lawyers tried to drag it out, stall the proceedings, but I knew their tricks. I'd studied them for years. Then something unexpected happened. During a deposition, one of Carl's former business associates was subpoenaed for a different case, bankruptcy fraud. Turns out Carl had been moving money under shell companies and hiding assets not just from me, but from the IRS. And guess what? One of those companies was named Blake Holdings, LLC, registered in my mother's maiden name, using her social security number. He'd been laundering money using my dead mother's identity. Suddenly, my case wasn't just civil. It was criminal. Federal investigators took interest. They reopened his tax records. A forensic accountant flagged over $300,000 in misplaced assets, all dating back to the year my mother died. And then came the most ironic twist of all. One of the investigators, Agent Marla Simmons, called me after reviewing the Blake Holdings files. "Leah, did you know you're technically listed as the silent owner of a property in New Mexico?" I blinked. What dirty out Carl had purchased a small vacation home under the fake LLC, and to keep up appearances, had listed me as the secondary beneficiary without ever telling me. "It's likely he did it for tax shelter reasons," she said. "But if your name's on it, you could technically petition for full ownership." Another weapon. Another crack in his lies. I filed the petition the same day. Carl started to unravel. He tried to spin the narrative in court that he'd done everything in Leah's best interest, that I was ungrateful, and that minor technical errors didn't mean he was a bad man. But the judge wasn't buying it. Neither was the media. Once word got out that a local stepfather had manipulated a grieving teenager out of her inheritance and was now under federal investigation for fraud, the headlines wrote themselves: "Stepdaughter turned lawyer takes down corrupt guardian justice." After 10 years, the legal showdown everyone's talking about. And then came the last twist. One I never saw coming. I received a letter. It was postmarked from Florida. No return address. But inside was a simple note, in careful cursive. "Leah, if you're reading this, it means the truth is finally coming to light. I knew Carl was hiding something. I didn't know it was this bad. I'm sorry. I didn't do more to protect you. Aunt Marlene. Aunt Marlene. My mother's estranged sister, the one Carl always claimed had cut ties with our family, turns out. She'd been pushed out not by choice. She and my mom had rekindled their relationship months before her death, and Marlene had warned her about Carl, warned her not to trust him with finances, warned her to put everything in my name. My mother had started to update her will, but she died before it was finalized. Carl knew, and he buried everything, including Aunt Marlene's letters. But now, I had another witness, another voice, another layer of truth. The case reached its climax when Carl took the stand. He sat there, arrogant as ever, in a navy blazer too tight for his aging frame. His eyes darted between the judge and my face, like he still couldn't believe the little girl he'd tricked into signing papers was now cross-examining him in open court. I asked one question. Mr. Reynolds, do you remember what you said to me the day after my mother's funeral? He paused, scoffed. I said a lot of things. I was grieving. I nodded, pulled out the transcript from my deposition, read it word for word. It's my house. Now, Leah, your mom made sure of that. The courtroom went silent. I looked him in the eye and said, "No, she didn't. You did, with lies. And now you're going to answer for them." That moment, the fury in his eyes, the tension in the air, I knew. He felt it. The power shift. He wasn't in control anymore. I was. And I wasn't finished. The trial dragged on for weeks, but by the third week, everything came crashing down for both of us. Carl's defense had started unraveling faster than he could adjust his tie. His lawyers tried to argue technicalities, statute of limitations, intent, even parental privilege. But it was too late. The facts were overwhelming. His fraud manipulation and the pattern of abuse were as clear as daylight. And still, he refused to admit any wrongdoing. But the real blow didn't come from me. It came from someone he never thought would turn on him, his own son Jared. Jared was older than me by 5 years. We were never close. In fact, after Mom died, he disappeared, moved out, cut contact. And I never knew why. Until now. Jared took the stand for the prosecution. "Carl isn't just a manipulator," he said, voice steady. "He's a predator of trust. I saw what he did to Leah, and I stayed silent for too long." He revealed how Carl had bragged about locking everything down after Mom's funeral, how he laughed, saying, "She'll thank me one day for taking this burden off her shoulders." He didn't do it to protect me. He did it to control me, to own me. And hearing Jared admit he knew and did nothing was a new kind of pain. But it wasn't the worst of it. The worst came after court adjourned for the day. I was alone in the parking lot unlocking my car when I heard a voice behind me. "You think you've won, don't you?" It was Carl. He had followed me out. There were no cameras, no lawyers, just us and the cold air between us. I didn't answer. I kept my hand on my car door, trying to stay calm. "You don't understand how the world works, Leah. You're still that little girl crying in her bedroom. You think a courtroom changes that." I turned to him slowly. "I'm not that little girl, and you're not the man you used to be. You're a liar who's finally been exposed." His face twisted, not with rage, but with something worse, contempt. "You were always weak. I did what I had to do. Your mother was too soft. She would have ruined you with sentiment." I stared at him, heart pounding. And then I said something I never planned but had felt for years. "You didn't just steal from me. You stole my mother's memory. You made her death about you. But this ends now." He laughed, dry, hollow, then walked away. But I couldn't move. Not for minutes. I stood there shaking, gritting my teeth so hard I could taste blood. Every nerve in my body screamed. I wanted to cry, scream collapse, but I didn't. Not anymore. That confrontation cracked something open inside me. Because no matter how strong I looked in court, no matter how flawless my cross-examinations were, I still carried that 17-year-old pain, that broken trust, that soul-crushing betrayal. Carl hadn't just taken assets. He'd taken my voice, my sense of safety, and replaced it with silence and shame. But now, I felt everything, all at once. And for the first time, I didn't run from it. I stood in it, let it burn. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat alone in my apartment, staring at the copy of my mother's letter, reading it over and over again. Leah is stronger than she knows. That line broke me. It shattered the last wall I had up. Because for years I'd built this armor, legal knowledge, courtroom confidence, cold detachment. But beneath it was a girl still desperate for her mom's approval, for someone to say you did the right thing. And now I realized I didn't need anyone's permission anymore. I had turned grief into justice, pain into precision. I wasn't just fighting back. I had become everything Carl feared. The final day of trial was surreal. The courtroom buzzed with quiet tension. Spectators packed the benches, former clients of Carl's law students, even reporters. Everyone wanted to see the verdict. But before closing statements, the judge gave Carl one last chance to speak. He stood, adjusted his tie, and in one final act of arrogance, he said, "This case is built on emotion, not law. My stepdaughter has turned her grief into a personal vendetta. She's weaponized the legal system." He turned to me. "You'll regret this, Leah. Maybe not today, but someday." I stared at him, my face calm. I already regretted it every day I stayed silent. Not anymore. Then the judge spoke. His ruling was scathing. Carl was found liable for fraud, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and unlawful transfer of assets from a minor. My mother's estate was to be fully restored to me. The property in New Mexico, the trust fund, and all associated accounts were frozen, pending full forensic investigation. And Carl, he was being referred for criminal prosecution, for federal fraud and identity misuse. The courtroom erupted. Reporters rushed outside. I stood there still, frozen. It was over. No. It had just begun, because for the first time in a decade, I didn't feel powerless. I felt whole. But as I walked out of that courtroom, something hit me. This wasn't just a legal victory. It was a personal resurrection. All those nights I cried into my pillow, all the birthdays I spent alone, all the times I doubted my worth, they had all led to this moment. I wasn't the girl he broke. I was the woman who rebuilt herself from scratch. And now, it was my turn to rewrite the story. 2 weeks after the verdict, I stood alone inside my mother's old house. It was quiet, too quiet. The furniture Carl bought was gone. The art on the walls, the rugs, the soulless decor he'd used to erase her presence, they had all been removed by court order. What remained was empty space and memories. The floor still creaked in the same spots. The smell of lavender faintly lingered on the staircase. For a moment I could almost hear her humming in the kitchen, the clatter of dishes, the warmth that used to live in these walls. But this time, I didn't cry. I just breathed. It was the first deep breath I'd taken in years. For so long, I'd been driven by fire. Revenge, justice, unfinished grief. But now the courtroom battles were over. Carl was facing charges. The estate was mine again. The fight had ended. So why did I feel hollow? I sat on the back porch steps, staring into the overgrown garden. That's where she used to plant daisies. I remembered how she'd kneel in the dirt, hands muddy smiling like it was therapy. Maybe it was. That's when I heard footsteps. I turned and saw Aunt Marlene walking up the path, holding a small tin watering can. I figured these poor things needed a little love, she said, kneeling beside the dead flower bed. I didn't say anything at first. I just watched her quietly remove dried weeds, her movements gentle and deliberate. "You came all this way to water dead plants?" I asked with a soft smile. "They're not dead," she said. "They're waiting." Something in my chest cracked open. We sat there for over an hour, talking, listening, filling in the years Carl tried to erase. She told me about the letter my mother sent her, how Mom had confided her fears about Carl, about the estate, about whether she'd left enough protection for me. She knew something was wrong, Leah, but she ran out of time. I swallowed hard, the lump in my throat stubborn. "I tried so hard to make her proud," I said. "But I never really knew if I did." Aunt Marlene looked me straight in the eye. "She would have been proud the moment you stood up for yourself. The rest, the courtroom, the law, the revenge, those were battles. But her pride in you, that was never conditional." I blinked fast to keep the tears from falling. In that moment, I realized something important. I had won the legal fight, yes, but the real victory wasn't about property or power. It was about finally feeling seen. Later that evening, I walked through every room in the house. Each space held a different version of me. 7-year-old Leah playing in the hallway, 13-year-old Leah sneaking into Mom's room, just to feel close to her 17-year-old. Leah signing away everything in that cold living room, and now 27-year-old Leah reclaiming every inch of it. I found one of Mom's old notebooks, tucked away in a linen closet. The pages were filled with lists, scribbles, gardening tips, and at the very back a line that stopped me cold. "Leave her strong. Leave her kind. Leave her knowing she was always enough." I pressed the notebook to my chest and closed my eyes. It was time to choose what would I do with all this. With this house, this legacy, this second chance. I could sell it, walk away, start fresh. No one would blame me. But deep down, I knew the answer. 3 days later, I posted the announcement on social media. Coming soon, the Blake Foundation for Young Women in Law, dedicated to helping girls from underrepresented backgrounds get into law school and fight for the justice they deserve. I was going to turn the house into a legal aid center. Mom's study would become a library. The guest room would be a meeting space. The dining room a mock trial practice area. Because what Carl tried to destroy, I would use it to build something better. Something that outlived both of us. Aunt Marlene was the first to donate. Jared sent a handwritten apology and pledged to volunteer. Even a few of my law school classmates offered to help design the mentorship program. But more importantly, survivors started reaching out. Emails, messages, quiet confessions from women who had been tricked, manipulated, silenced by those closest to them. And every single one ended the same way. "Your story gave me courage. I didn't expect to become anyone's inspiration, but maybe that's the point. When you reclaim your own voice, you give others permission to find theirs too." I stood on the porch again a week later, watching a contractor install the new sign at the gate. "Blake House Justice begins here." I smiled, hands tucked into the pockets of my coat. This wasn't just my mother's home anymore. It wasn't Carl's crime scene either. It was mine. And I knew exactly who I was. Not a victim. Not a pawn. Not a girl with something to prove. I was Leah Blake. Daughter. Lawyer. Survivor. And finally free. 6 months later. The courtroom where it all began was once again full. But this time, it wasn't a civil suit. It was a criminal sentencing. Carl stood at the defense table, in an orange jumpsuit, wrists cuffed, shoulders slumped. The man who once strutted through my mother's home like a king, now couldn't even look the judge in the eye. He was found guilty on all federal charges: identity fraud, falsifying legal documents, and exploitation of a minor. The sentence 15 years in federal prison, no parole, for at least 10. The judge didn't hold back. You used trust as a weapon. You preyed on a grieving child. The law was not made for people like you. To manipulate, it was made to protect people like her. Carl's face twisted, but he said nothing. No apology. No remorse. Just silence. And that silence, it was louder than any excuse he could have given. Outside the courthouse, the media waited. But I didn't speak to reporters. Instead, I walked past the cameras holding the arm of Aunt Marlene, with my head held high. She whispered, "Your mother would be so damn proud." Later, I sent a letter to the women who'd reached out to me during the trial, those who had signed things they didn't understand, who had trusted the wrong people. I told them justice takes time, but truth has a longer memory than any lie. Carl lost everything, the properties, the accounts, his reputation. But most of all, he lost control. That was the real punishment. He no longer got to shape the narrative. I did. And as Blake House officially opened its doors, with its first class of 5 young women, each determined to change the world through law, I felt it, that deep soul-level satisfaction. Not revenge for revenge's sake, but justice served cold, clean, and permanent. I used to believe justice was a destination, a courtroom, a verdict, a headline. But now I know it's something quieter. It's a deep breath in your childhood home after years of silence. It's planting daisies in your mother's garden and watching them bloom again. It's finally saying, "You don't get to define me anymore." I didn't win because I destroyed Carl. I won because I rebuilt me. From a girl who signed away everything to a woman who reclaimed it all and more. And if you're listening to this, and someone once made you feel small, powerless, or ashamed, hear me clearly. You are not what they did to you. You are what you rise into after. Set your boundaries. Hold your head high. And never forget your voice is your inheritance. Don't let anyone steal it. Have you ever been underestimated? Then proved them all wrong. Share your story in the comments. And if this moved, you hit like, subscribe, and pass it on. Someone out there needs to know they're not alone.